Hello and welcome. UVA Speaks is a podcast of Lifetime Learning, a division of the Office of Engagement at the University of Virginia. Lifetime Learning brings the knowledge and expertise of UVA's faculty to the university's alumni, friends, and families. My name is Susan Lynch, and I am the Associate Director of Lifetime Learning at the University of Virginia's Office of Engagement. This podcast features Philip Potter, a professor of politics from the Department of Politics at the College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, and the founding director of the National Security Data and Policy Institute at the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy at the University of Virginia. Professor Potter's research focuses on U.S. foreign policy, military affairs, and international security. He has published dozens of articles, policy papers, and government reports on these topics, as well as 2 books. He also serves as a university expert for the intelligence community and a senior advisor in the Department of Defense. In this podcast, Professor Potter will talk with us about national security issues and the National Security Data and Policy Institute at the University of Virginia. So thank you, Professor, for speaking with me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So first, UVA's new National Security Data and Policy Institute opened its doors this past August. For those who are not familiar with the national security sector, what areas of government service does it represent, and why was UVA chosen as its home? And how did the Institute come about, and what is it seeking to accomplish?
Thanks for that. So I think it's a really good question and something that's particularly interesting for students who are thinking about getting into this sector. We have a tendency to think about national security as just the military, or maybe expansively the military and intelligence. It is those things. Those are crucial parts of it, but it extends further. So we also have partnerships that draw in folks from the diplomatic corps, from the trade and commerce elements, from energy, from innovation and industry. And so we think of national security as the holistic effort across government and the whole of society to preserve our security and way of life. And so students moving into this realm, one of the things we often will try to relay to them is that there are a lot of opportunities here. There are a lot of different ways that you can make a contribution in the national security sector. The National Security Data and Policy Institute is a joint effort by the University of Virginia and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That's the overarching authority that coordinates the elements of our intelligence community. It's an effort by us and them to contribute understanding in the area of data and national security policy. And so in particular, addressing issues around the huge proliferation of data that confronts us in day-to-day life. That is no less a concern in security affairs, particularly for the intelligence community. Increasingly, the trouble is not sort of, do we have any information about a problem? It's, we're flooded and up to our eyeballs in information, and we can't tell what the important parts are. And so we're really engaged in helping the community think through how you find the needles in those haystacks, right? How you help analysts make sense in an environment where that proliferation of data makes things really, really hard to handle. And so we provide tools and policy insights on that. We're also helping broadly in the area of emerging technology. We have broad projects in biotechnology, in microprocessors, and in artificial intelligence that help us try to understand and help the community understand where we stand in competition with parties around the globe, whether they're adversaries or friends, or how are we doing in that innovation story. And then a lot of big data analytical processes in identifying actors in networks, whether they're supply chain networks or illicit finance networks or those sorts of things. How do we use those networks and understand what's happening inside of them?
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that context. You know, you have an extensive background in national security research and policy. What topics first sparked your interest in the field? And how did you come about to head major institutions like the National Security Policy Center and the National Security Data and Policy Institute here at UVA?
So it's sort of a long story for me. A lot of people in my family have had careers in the government side of things. I'm actually the oddball academic in the group. And so for me, it's always been sort of a story about how do you get knowledge and practice to live together side by side. Some of this comes from, I think, frustrations that almost everybody has about the way both government and academia work. Sometimes it feels like government just sort of runs through its processes without necessarily sticking its head up and doing the smart thing and learning the right lesson and leveraging the right knowledge. And sometimes it feels like academia produces insights that no one cares about with little regard to how those might actually be implemented. And so for me, a lot of my career has been about marrying those two things together, figuring out how I can understand government processes well enough to allow them to incorporate new knowledge and how I can shape knowledge in a way that it's applicable to government processes. Uh, at the same time, I've always been really passionate about getting students involved in this world. One of the things that I think does happen is unless you have parents who are part of the national security community, you grew up in McLean, Virginia, and everybody works for the intelligence community or something like that. This can be a really murky kind of part of the world for people to try to understand. And it's something that I think students struggle to get into. I got my PhD in Los Angeles, and it reminds me a little bit of showing up in Los Angeles and realizing that there was an entire city of people whose parents were not disappointed if they thought they would go into show business. That was, in fact, a totally normal industry, a totally regular job, careers, millions of dollars at stake. And it's the same thing with national security. And so helping students work through that process is sort of another thing that I've cared a lot about. And so in order to achieve those goals sort of over time, it really is a group effort with the teams here at the National Security Policy Center and the National Security Data Policy Institute, have built sort of institutions that are designed to achieve those things. And so we work really closely with students in order to demystify the national security community, to help them get those internships that get them their security clearances, help them understand the array of opportunities that we were talking about earlier in this conversation, that it isn't, their dream job at DoD is not the end of the game. They can also contribute in all sorts of other places. It's a much larger, more robust enterprise than a lot of people realize. And then on the research side, that's where the Institute really lives, pulling those students, but also faculty from across grounds into these really cutting edge research domains with a close eye toward how we both respond to the demands of government, answer the questions that they desperately need answered, and then answer them in a way that allow the government to actually do something with the information in hand. And so that's sort of the way all these pieces fit together. And it's becoming a really exciting time for the university because I think we do have a lot of momentum in this particular space. And it allows opportunities for our students and for our faculty to make a real contribution. And that's sort of the most important thing here, and part of what delineates this part of the world is, as our partners will describe it, it's very mission driven, right? People really respond to this kind of work because they feel like they're doing something important. And that's true whether it's the students moving into government or industry. It's equally true of the faculty. They often will really enjoy working on a juicy scientific problem, particularly if they know that it also is going to have this real societal impact.
Yeah, I can see this as a great opportunity for students. It would seem really daunting for many, I'm sure, to try and sort of get into this sector.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, and part of what is really nice about this is, so there's, we often will talk about the intelligence community or the national security community, but part of that is because the nature of the work, it tends to build these sort of cohorts around it. And that's true at a macro level, but it's also true for our students. So we have offices down here at 10th Street, which are frankly mostly big open student spaces. And, there's a cohort of students who come and really have formative experiences here with us, but really even more so with each other. And there's a constellation of student clubs and organizations that are sort of loosely federated around this effort. And one of the things we actually try pretty hard to do is not turn this into a thing where, you have to do this many activities with us or check this many boxes. If folks want to be just sort of part of the overall orbit, and enrich their experience on grounds in that way, we're excited to contribute to that.
That's great. What a wonderful opportunity. So, what are the major questions and topic areas the National Security Data and Policy Institute seeks to explore, and how would you describe its approach to better understanding these issues?
It's a really good question because this is a crowded space, right? This is a place where a lot of universities are trying to make a contribution. And so I think there's a real question to be asked about, well, what are we going to do differently that makes it worth doing, right? UVA has always had a pretty substantial presence in the national security community, just in terms of the sheer number of alumni we have up in Washington working in these domains, right? I spent a lot of time in these buildings. You can't go 10 feet without running into a double, triple who. But we haven't been super institutionalized in this space until quite recently, and that's sort of what the big change is here with the institute coming into the fore. When I think about it, I think part of what we really bring to the table as an institution, as the University of Virginia, is this synthesized understanding of both the cutting edge science and the policy. So it gets back to that point that I was raising about you can't just sort of do the think tank thing and talk about the policy problems. That's not going to really move the needle. You can't just do the super fine grained bench science. That's not going to move the needle. What we have that really advantages us is that proximity to the city to sort of know what's required and the policy acumen to contribute to it with the sort of no kidding scientific capabilities. And so because we're comparatively small, compared to some of our competitors, I realize to most of us UVA feels huge, but by university standards, we're comparatively small. We're able to sort of stay tightly integrated on that. And so we have really great partnerships at the Institute between folks from the School of Public Policy and then more technical people over at data science, for example, or our Biocomplexity Institute that give us that full spectrum capability. In terms of where we're applying that, part of what is really great about our partnership with OD&I is that we're allowed to sort of pick our battles. We pick places where we think we can make the biggest contribution, and we do that in partnership with them. We work closely and sort of as part of their chief data officer, the office of their chief data officer. And so that gives us, through their CDO, this broad sort of purview into a number of different problem types. Right now, as I mentioned, we're thinking primarily about 3 technical areas that they've tasked to us as sort of national priorities. The first of those is artificial intelligence. And so we've got some really exciting projects thinking about, for example, what's really going on in DeepSeek, that new Chinese technology that came out recently. We've been sort of taking that apart and trying to understand that. We have work in biotechnology, which is something that is a really active area in Charlottesville, right? It's something where we have sort of an emerging regional hub here in town that combines not just the university, but a lot of spin-off industry. We're sort of able to lean on that. And then we have work in microprocessors, so thinking about sort of what some of these supply chain kinks and stories we have about export controls and those sorts of things, how that's likely to affect capabilities moving forward for us and countries like China. Right? So a lot of this comes down to how we understand the state of science, the cutting edge, the state of competition between us and the PRC in these technical domains. And then we have a number of projects underway that are a little bit more, I hesitate to say abstract. I think the right word might be general, right? We're trying to think about that big data problem, right? If you're an analyst in the intelligence community confronted by a ton of data in illicit finance, you have Bitcoin data kind of coming out of your ears, how are you supposed to know where to prioritize in order to identify the bad actors who are moving narcotics inside of those networks? How would you prioritize in order to make that happen? Or you're more on the commercial side and you're looking at supply chain vulnerabilities and you've, again, got data coming out of your ears. What do you do to know where those kinks are? Where is it likely to break? How seriously should we be taking this particular threat about rare earths or kinks in the microprocessor chain or whatever it might be? What can we do to help there? And so we build these larger systems that allow analysts not to be replaced. And I think that's an important point here. There's no magic box that we're going to generate that's going to replace the intelligence officer. What we're trying to do is provide tools that are helpful.
There's just so much complexity to all the things that you're just talking about. So yes, any kind of tool I think would be helpful.
Right, and that's why, a team at a major research university is the only way to do it, because we can pretty elegantly move across grounds and say, hey, you're the expert in this. We know the policy process. We know enough to help you with the dialogue translate to government. Uh, can you do anything here? And we can have that back and forth internally, and then have that back and forth with our friends at ODNI. And that's where the magic happens, because no one person, especially myself, no one person can really wrangle all of these topical areas. It requires these multifaceted teams of teams.
Right, great. So you've spoken a lot, about these partnerships, but what does this investment in national security mean for the University of Virginia and for the Institute's partners, which are the Batten School, the School of Data Science, and the Biocomplexity Institute?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it as it means the University of Virginia is finally doing what I think it should be doing, right? So, and a better way to put that is sort of taking its rightful place in the sun. I mentioned, we've been contributing to the national security community all along. I think it would be a mistake to think that this is us making our first foray into a contribution. We have tons of faculty around grounds who have been doing really important work in this domain. We've had students moving up into this career path. I'm sure since Thomas Jefferson's time. Like I can't name them. I only know the more recent ones, but this has always been a thing. And some of it really comes down to this location and leveraging this location that we have. There's real value to being about 100 miles from the city. I consider that to be sort of a sweet spot. I drive up 29, practically once a week to get up to something in the city, right? Our partners come down here and consider it just a real joy to be down in Charlottesville for a day. But that component of being there for a day really matters, right? Because they then get back, or they stay only if they want to, right? And so we're far enough outside the bubble to not have to run at every bright, shiny thing, every sort of short-term issue. We can pick our battles and say, no, this is not what we're going to do right now. We don't think that that's going to be a durable problem. We think that's a flash in the pan. We're going to concentrate our efforts over here. But we're close enough in to have really tight collaborative relations with these partners in the city or Virginia or Northern Virginia. And that to me is important, right? And so for the university, I think what we're doing is by building up the institute, by building up these official partnerships, we're sort of cementing that place that we've had on the research side, on the student side, and because of this locational advantage in ways that I think allow us to then really hit the ground running and do important work very quickly. I think for the schools, for data science, for the Batten School, for biocomplexity, but then also others at the Darden School, the School of Law, School of Engineering, Medicine, there are relationships all over this university. It provides a magnifying function. And so we're able to move problem sets over to those partners for them to work on in almost a clearinghouse kind of way. We're able to smooth over partnerships that might otherwise be bureaucratically, certainly not impossible, but just a little more challenging than we can make them. And that's really what it comes down to is I don't ever want this to be a story about replacing existing capability, either in government or at the university. It's about augmentation. It's about what can we do to make this whole better than the sum of its parts. And I think we just have a ton of opportunity there. And I think the schools have a ton of capability. And coalescing that allows the university as an entire entity to really step out in a way that says, hey, we're contributing to national security. We're doing the sort of thing that a major public university should be doing, right? And that meshes really closely with a lot of stories that we tell ourselves and our students about the value of public service, about the important role that a public university plays in the national architecture. And so sometimes I think building these institutions allows us to really magnify that contribution.
I completely agree. I was going to say a public university, this is what the kind of thing we should be doing. Absolutely.
It's sort of a no-brainer, I think, and it's a story that it's a real joy to tell because it is just so congruent with who we kind of think we are, but also who I think the rest of people out there in the world, when they think what a public institution should be doing, this is exactly the kind of thing that I think they think of.
Absolutely. Thank you. And finally, why are the issues the Institute is studying significant? And what kind of impact does this work have on our country as a whole?
That's a good question, and I think what it really comes down to in a lot of ways is your first question, which is what is national security altogether, right? And I think one of the real challenges is that increasingly when we talk about national security, we're not talking about sort of single things, easily delineated. It's not the Cold War. We're not talking about the missile gap. We're not talking about a particular type of fighter jet. We're really talking about these whole of society kinds of competitions, right? And we increasingly are talking about technological competition in domains that have military and intelligence applications, but are frankly civilian technologies. And 90% of the overall story is actually the impact that they're having on the civilian economic side of things. So artificial intelligence, I think, is a great example of that. Obvious applications for security, but that's not really what's driving this story, right? It's actually a much, much larger story than that. And so I think that the need for this increasingly sort of comes from the ability to synthesize these technical areas across a broad array of partners. So making sure that we have some integration between government and academia and industry, right? To make sure that we are addressing these challenges in a comprehensive and holistic kind of way. And that's where increasingly, I believe, a public institution like the university can play a particularly important role because there are elements of the way that these different components of society have to interact with one another that a university, because of its public service mission, but because it sits, and we are governmental, we're part of the state of Virginia or Commonwealth of Virginia, right? But we sit outside the federal government, right? But we're a nonprofit or a knowledge center where we have a certain credibility about what it is that we're trying to do, where we are not in competition with industry and we are not actually government, federal government, but and so therefore we're able to sort of build these really virtuous cycles around these technologies that are not in one lane. And that to me is a really large part of the story because as we look at what it means to compete over time with a country like China or deal with a country like Russia or all of the other challenges that we're likely to face moving forward, most of which are going to be unforeseen because that's sort of the nature of the beast. You have to be thinking in these expansive ways about technologies that are popping up in all sorts of parts of American life, and technologies that are moving from sort of bench science at the university to applied use with sort of head snapping speed. And so I think the university and the institute have a real role to play in contributing to that overall story.
Great. So thank you so much, Professor Potter, for sharing all of this information, about national security, how students can get involved, the faculty, and certainly the National Security Data and Policy Institute. These are such important issues, and I appreciate that UVA is taking a lead establishing this institute. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with UVA's alumni, friends, and families.
Thank you, and I encourage everyone to look us up and to get in touch. And we're always open to conversations and partnerships and bringing our alumni network together. As I mentioned, many have been up in DC working for a long time who are alumni of this great institution. And so, one of the things that we're doing is coalescing that group again and making them more than the sum of their parts as well.
That's a great opportunity. Great. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
great. And thank you to everybody for listening. For upcoming podcasts and other lifetime learning programming, recordings, and blogs, please visit our website at engagement.virginia.edu/learn. You can also find our podcast on the Virginia Audio Collective, which is a network of UVA podcasts hosted by WTJU Radio and can be found at virginiaaudio.org. So thanks again, and we look forward to taking part in future lifetime learning programs.